Hey guys, it's Adam. I hope you're good. Today we're going to be looking at compression. Now, we're starting the next few lessons to look at some basic mix techniques, really, but I'm not a mix engineer at all, and these are techniques that I use on every single track in every project I work on, mainly because they just make everything sound better. So today we're looking at compression, which is a very, very commonly used tool in music production. Some of the sounds we've already used probably have compression on them already as default in Logic. But today we're specifically going to look at compressing the vocal. I'm aware that you might not know exactly what that means or what that looks like. Basically, compression is a way that we make sounds that have big dynamics, so they're loud and quiet, have a little bit less dynamic, so it squashes them down, and that lets us make them sound closer to you in a mix. So that's why vocals sound like they're here when the rest of the track sounds further back, and it also makes stuff sound less loud and quiet. You don't want your drums being here and then suddenly further back. So it's a really useful tool for lots of reasons. Today we're just going to look at the basics and how I'd use them in the track that we've made together. But hopefully at the end of it you'll have some idea of how to use it in your own songs and how to use it to make your own recordings sound a little bit more professional. So let's get started. Okay guys, we're back in Logic now looking at compression today. I'm sorry it's a bit dark and dingy looking. It's a really horrible day the day I'm filming this compression lesson, and you might hear the rain. I've done my best, but it's so grim, so bear with the darkness. I've tried. But what we're going to do today is look at what compression is, how we use it, and just what the controls are like. What are other applications for it? So you may have seen the word compressor around, especially if you've been looking into the presets in Logic. So there's automatically a compressor on the drum kit. There's a lot of compressors automatically on the, if I can find them, the guitars. They already have compressors on them. So you might have seen the word. You may even know what they do, but for those that don't, we're just going to go to the lead vocal up here, go to audio effects, we're going to go to dynamics, and then dynamics, then compressor, and we're going to open a mono compressor. So this is what the default compressor in Logic looks like. It says it's a platinum digital compressor. It's just a clean, really simple compressor. We're going to go to the graph menu here, just because I think it's easier to understand what a compressor is looking at this menu than this menu. I usually use this one, but this is easier to understand for a beginner. So let's play a bit of the vocal and just see what happens to this graph.
Go, wishing we could start brand new, thinking what I do for me and you.
So if you can see, we've got this being the volume of our vocal, and then this line at the top coming down showing something, and we're also seeing a little dot moving up and down this line on the left hand side. So what's going on here? Basically what compressors do is set a limit, and then whenever the volume of the track goes above that limit, they bring it back down by a set amount. This sounds pretty specific, like they're pretty niche, like when are you really going to use this? But actually, it's incredibly important. It's used in all sorts of different applications in production. So we use it on vocals, as you've seen, guitars, synths, drums, especially in drums. And it basically makes recorded sound fit better in a mixed track when stuff gets busy. It's, as we've said a lot of times through this course, it's about giving things their own space. And if we can make their shape easier to mold and put into spaces, it helps. So if we zoom in on this track, so I'm just holding Option and scrolling down to expand it like this, we can see that there are some really loud sections and there's some really quiet sections here, and the dynamic difference is quite extreme. So the job of a compressor is to reduce the difference between the quietest sections and the loudest sections, and in turn that makes the whole vocal come forward in a mix. That makes whenever you hear the vocal, it's going to sound more polished. All the breaths and stuff are going to be brought out, even if you don't want them, so we need to be aware of that. But everything's going to be a lot clearer and a lot less dynamic. And that's something to consider. The more you compress a track, the more you compress an element in your song, the less dynamic it's going to be. Now, for some things like, for example, funk guitar parts, that's great. We don't want dynamic, we just want that percussive ba 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 da. So you're going to compress that pretty hard. If you want like a really emotional acoustic part, probably not going to compress that so much. With a vocal, especially in pop, they're quite compressed. But we don't want to compress them all at once. We want to do it in stages so it's a little bit more transparent. So it's a little less obvious what we're doing and it doesn't sound quite so pumping. You'll see what I mean. So essentially, the compressor looks at this signal here and says, right, when the volume goes past a certain point, I'm going to reduce it. So how do we set that? Let's look at these controls. On the left, we have the threshold. Now, if we move the threshold, you can see this line moving on the graph right on the right-hand side. The threshold tells the compressor at which volume you want it to start compressing. So whenever the signal passes -31, that's when we're going to start compressing. And this is something that you can't really give a rule. It depends very much on how loud the signal is that what we do. We're going to show you how to find this in a second. It's usually just trial and error. The ratio is how steep or how hard the compressor is going to reduce your signal by. So it's very, very simple. It looks complicated and mathematical. It's not. So if we look here, the ratio we've got when we set it to 2 is 2 to 1. And that means for every 1 decibel, which is how we measure volume, for every 1 decibel above our limit, the signal goes, it's going to be reduced by 2 decibels. So this is how hard we compress. So you can really, really put a limit on here that if it goes up by 1, it's going to be brought down by 30, and that's going to be a brutal compression. Let's listen to how this sounds when we put the, or how it looks even when we put the vocal through it.
High, but you let
Look
go.
how harsh this compression is.
Wishing
We're getting 20 decibels, 25 decibels of compression in places. That's incredibly extreme. We want to be aiming for like 3 to 5 per compressor, really. So 30 dB is a lot. But that's useful in other contexts. So that's all the ratio is doing. It's telling the compressor how much to reduce that signal by. We're going to set it around 4. So I think 4.1 is as close as you can get in Logic. The makeup is how much extra gain you're going to give this signal. So compression, by nature, makes things quieter than they are. It reduces volume. It doesn't bring volume up. So we have this knob to increase the output of the compressor. Now, Logic automatically assumes you're going to be reducing it by 12 dB, so it gives it quite a lot of extra gain. We don't want to set it to 0, but let's reduce it by 5, I think, for this. We'll have to trial and error it again. The knee controls, again, how hard the compressor is going to hit. Is it going to be a soft curve that slowly introduces the compression, or at 0, a knee, a really hard angle that as soon as you're past this point, that's when the compression starts. We're going to set it around 4 or 5, just keep it nice and soft. We don't want it to be too noticeable. It's going to be quite a subtle, transparent compression. So the attack and the release knobs tell the compressor when to turn on and start compressing, and how long to take before they turn off again. So basically, as soon as the volume goes above that point, how long it should wait before it starts bringing it down. This is useful for drums because if you hit a snare, you want the transient, the click of the snare to come through, and then maybe you want to compress the tail of it. So you want a slightly slower attack so that you get the crack of the snare and then the compression hits. If it was 0 milliseconds, it would compress the whole sound, and then you're not going to get the energy of the snare you want. With this vocal, we want a slightly slower attack. Nothing crazy. Let's try about 50 milliseconds. And then we want the release to be quite fast. Now, Logic has an automatic release, but for the first amount of compression we're going to be applying, I want this to be quick. So let's set it to 10 milliseconds. So now it's just a case of experimenting with the threshold to find out a place where we can get a good amount of compression. What's a good amount of compression? Well, for this first stage, if you like, I just want to try and tame the loudest parts. So I don't want much compression on the quiet areas, but when the loud parts come in, I want the compressor to really quickly snap the volume down and then return back to bass really quick. That's why the release is so fast here. So let's try and find a place on the threshold that does that.
Had my hopes up high, but you let go. Wishing we could start brand new. Thinking what I do for me and you.
That's pretty great. So on the quiet sections, we're getting 1 or 2 dB, whereas on the loud sections,
thinking what
we're getting 10 decibels of compression. That's great. We would never want 10 decibels normally, but this is just taming the really loud sections. So that's spot on. So we can close this compressor. We can open one more though, because as I said, little layers of compression is better than one big one or one massive amount. It's more transparent. And what you can see along the top is different kinds of compressor. Now, we're not going to worry about this and these different variants in this tutorial, but they're all based on famous studio compressors. These are really, really essential pieces of gear. And usually on a vocal, that first compressor we used would have been effect, and this one would be an opto. But you can get similar results using this Platinum Digital. The thing to remember is all the controls are the same. Sometimes they remove some, and sometimes, you know, they're exactly the same as the original, but every single compressor you see is going to have these controls. So if you experiment with these and you learn them and you know how to read this graph here and this meter, you're going to be well versed in using compressors, no matter which one you come across in a studio. So the next stage of compression isn't going to trim the tops off the loudest pits. It's going to be a more gentle but continuous style of compression. We want to make sure the whole vocal track is being squashed a little bit, just to make sure it's not so dynamic and we can bring it forward in the mix. So we're going to set the ratio to around 4 or 5. Let's try 5. We're going to leave the makeup where it is. We can play with that later. We want the knee to be nice and soft, around 5 or 6. The attack and the release can stay where they are by default on automatic. Now, let's play the track, and we're looking for 3 decibels of compression. On average, it's going to jump around, but we want around 3 throughout. Let's have a play.
Said so, had my hopes up high, but you let go. Wishing we could start brand new, thinking what I'd do for me and you.
Cool, that looks good. So even in the quiet sections, we're getting 3 and 4 decibels. And then in the loud sections, it's around 4. It jumps up to 6 and 7 occasionally, but most of the time it's nice and level. And we're not clipping down here, so the volume's good. The makeup gain doesn't need to be turned up anymore. That's a good amount of compression. If you look here, just above this EQ button, we can see how much compression is being applied. Just a useful little readout for you. I wouldn't pay too much attention to it. So now, you don't need to know how to do this just yet, but if I export this file so we can see it below, just like this, and unmute this one for you. So now what we can do is compare how both sound with and without compression. Just by looking, we can see which one's been compressed. You can see that on this, we've got a really loud peak here, and then lots of little quiet ones here. This is definitely a louder section. Whereas down here, because we set the attack a little bit slower, you're still getting the transient look, the first hit of each syllable, but then very quickly the compressor clamps down. So we've got a far more level volume throughout the whole vocal here, which makes it a lot easier to slot into a track. Look how much this big transient here has been compressed. This is how it was before. Thinking what I do. And now. Thinking what. Oh, let me mute this. Thinking what I do. Thinking what I do. It just fits in the mix so much better, and it enables us to turn this up without getting in the way. So let's delete that. Unsolo everything and turn these compressors back on. I think we can actually turn up the makeup gain a little bit, because we're not getting a huge amount of output here. Had your mind made, heartbreak. Hung my head low, because you said so. Had my hopes. Cool, so we're going to go for 8 decibels of makeup gain here. You're going to have to experiment with your input, but for me, 8 is about right. Had your mind. Wishing we could start brand new, thinking what I do. So compressors make a big difference. They don't just improve the volume, but they make the signal cleaner. They make it easier to fit into things. So let's press X to open up this mixer, and we're going to copy these compressors over to our doubles and our harmonies, just by holding Option and dragging, exactly the same as you do with clips. I've just turned that off. And to our harmonies. The only reason I'm using the same compression on all the elements here is because I know they were sung by the same singer in the same session with the same microphone in the same room. If you are trying to process different vocalists or different mics recorded at different times, you're gonna have to go in and tweak the settings. But for this, I'm pretty sure they're all gonna be around the same volume because the gain would have been set the same. And I know Charlie's quite a good singer technically, so I don't need to pay too much attention to it. He's probably got it under control. So the only thing to bear in mind now is that we've compressed the signal. The volume is going to be a lot more continuous. So we're going to have to do a little bit of volume balancing with the track to make sure everything still fits together right. And that might lead us into some automation, which we looked at briefly last week, but this week we're going to look at volume automation. Let's just listen through the verse. Remember way back when we used to call it love, and the lead writing initials through the middle of the heart, and all the time we
spent just staring at the stars, thinking what I'd do for me and you.
And the pre-chorus?
One take, mistake.
Sounds very loud to me.
Had your mind made, heartbreak. Hold my head low,
Harmony's too loud.
'cause you said so. Have my
And
hopes
the lead vocal
up
seems to get
high.
lost in the chorus. So we've got some work. The verse now sounds great and it's balanced with the doubles, but in the pre-chorus, the vocal, because there's less elements, comes through too much, and then in the chorus we lose it with all the extra guitars and things. So let's hit A, open up automation, and then we're going to hold our command key to get this crosshair. We're going to select this little section here, the pre-chorus, and click. That's going to give us these two dots where our markers were, and if we drag this line, we can turn up or down just the pre-chorus. How cool is that? So let's turn it down, not by much, let's turn it down by 3 dB and see if that improves it.
One take,
Maybe a little more.
mistake. Had your mind made.
But then towards the end, it's getting a little bit drowned out again. So let's click on this dot and bring it up. So now we're fading from 8.7 dB, minus 8.7, up to 7 across the length of that pre-chorus, so that when we get to the chorus, this last line is louder because the synths are going to be louder. So this is just a basic automation of the volume. We then said that the chorus, which is this section, was too quiet. So let's click on this line and drag it up by 2 dB. So we're on 4.9. Let's go to 2.9-ish. 2.7 is fine.
Hold my head low,
And now it sits on top.
'cause you said so. Have my hopes up high, but you let go.
Perfect. Let's do exactly the same for our double. So in the doubles, we're just going to hold the crosshair tool again, command click, and then we're going to click to get these lines, and we're going to turn them up by, did we say 2 dB? So from 7.9 to 5.9. The harmonies we can mix in because they're just in the chorus, so that's fine. So let's hit A, and then balance the harmonies with our new volume of the lead.
Hold my head low, 'cause you said so. Have my hopes up high, but you let go. Wishing we could start brand new, thinking what I do for me and you.
So now I've listened slightly louder. That was probably a little bit too much. Let's bring this down just a little bit, maybe 3.5. We're going to bring this down by another dB to match. This is the thing with mixing. It's very hard to do without continuously listening to see the differences you're doing. You've got to do it gradually, listen, go back and make the changes, and then check again until you're happy with it. The harmonies sound quite right in comparison to the track, but the lead vocal was too loud. So I brought the lead vocal on the doubles down to fit the harmony.
Heartbreak. Hold my head low, 'cause you said so. Have my hopes up high, but you let go. Wishing we could start brand new, thinking what I do for me and you.
Cool. I'm happy with that now. I did a few more tweaks there that you saw me do. I just moved around the lines a little bit so it all sat quite well together. So now I think from that pre-chorus into the chorus,
One
we're sounding pretty
take,
good.
mistake. Had your mind made, heartbreak. Hold my head low, 'cause you said so. Have my hopes up high.
Cool. I'm really happy with that. I think it sounds good. We've compressed the vocals down. We don't need to compress the synths or the guitars or the drums in this because all of those presets we've been using have automatic compressors preset for those instruments, which is really useful for us. That's a great thing about Logic. But now you should have some understanding of what a compressor does, how we use it on a vocal, how we should do it in stages rather than all at once, what all the controls do, and then how we use a vocal after we've compressed it to slot in the track just using volume and a little bit of automation. What I would really encourage you to do, and this is so important because for years I didn't understand compression, I just sort of knew it was a thing you had to do, and people would say like, Adam, your vocal, I'd go to people and I'd say, my vocals just don't sound great, they just don't sound like they're in front of you, they sound like they're way back in the mix or whatever, and they would be like, you need more compression. So then I'd come home and I'd be like, okay, cool. So we're just going to turn this up and we're going to turn this up. We're going to get loads of compression. And we did get loads of compression, but it wasn't good. It sounded it sounded terrible. And it took me ages to work out that you need little bits in stages, and also to work out how to use these controls to get the sound that I heard in my head. So go away, find a vocal, or use the one that's in the resources for this lesson on the website, and play with these different knobs and try and work out exactly what they all do. But if you think you're getting to grips with the Platinum Digital and you know all the controls, try and hear the differences between these different types of compression, the optical and the FET and the VCA, and if you can hear the difference, where you might use them. I might come back and do another lesson on compression because it really is a massive topic, but this is the basics. Hopefully you're cool with what we did today, and yeah, we're going to be looking at some cool stuff next week, so let's finish this lesson off. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too much information all at once. Hopefully you're still with me. Compression is really useful, it's really important, but I know it's a little bit much to get your head around at first. If you get stuck, just go back and watch that video again, and hopefully you'll start to get your head around it. If you can't hear the difference that's happening, don't worry too much. Like, if you can't hear exactly the tiny tweaks, remember, I'm listening here on some really expensive studio monitors, and a lot of you aren't going to have that. That's completely fine. Just use the best headphones you've got. Headphones are usually better than speakers. They're a little bit more accurate sounding. And just play with it to the point that you can hear it, so you're getting an idea of how compressors work on your end. Because there's one thing understanding the theory and knowing how they work visually, seeing the needle move, and there's another thing hearing the difference that they have, right? So don't get too caught up if you can't hear exactly what's going on all the time. That will come with experience, that will come with time. I just want you to understand what they're for and the difference that they can make in songs like this, and hopefully in your songs too. Next time we're going to be checking out EQ, which is really going to clean this track up. It's going to make it sound very much more together. So I'll see you over there in a minute. Hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. Cheers.